Hey everyone, Reaper here again with another video game collection video. This time I'm focusing in on my Sega CD collection. I don't have too many of these games, but I started collecting them, or at least buying them, playing them rather, when the Sega CD was about a year old. Now, I'll talk a little bit about the Sega CD. Like I said, I don't have too many of these games, so this video will be over before you know it. But the Sega CD had come out, the original model, Model 1, came out in 1992. And sometime during the next year, or at least before I bought it, which was the next year, they released the Model 2, which is the one I had. The Model 1 was a pretty sleek-looking CD system. Now, the Sega CD wasn't the very first CD-based video game home system. I believe the TurboGrafx 16 CD, or the Turbo Duo, or whatever you want to call it, that was the first. But Sega CD, I believe, was the second. So it was, pretty cool technology. So anyway, I had the Model 2, and that was the one where the Sega Genesis would fit into the Sega CD on the side. The Model 1 was the version where the Sega Genesis would go underneath it. And I believe that was the first home CD-based console, where the disc tray would eject on its own. It would come out on its own, after you press the button, of course. But the other ones, you had to press like an eject button, and the lid would pop open. So that was pretty innovative for the Model 1. But like I said, the Model 1 was discontinued after about a year, and that was, I think, that's one of the most sought out ones. Now, after the Model 2, there were a couple other versions of the Sega CD. There was the Sega CDX, which is the one I have. It almost looks like a Discman. You could play your Sega CD games and also play your Sega Genesis games. It was all built into one little system. And that was one of the big things with the Sega CD. Now, the Sega CD did not do well in the United States. I don't even think it did well in Japan. For many reasons. There are other YouTube channels that get into that, but one of the things I'll say about it is that the Sega CD, it was expensive, okay? A lot of people, I don't know, like I said with the Sega Saturn video, I mentioned Sega CD a few times. A lot of people weren't really willing to spend, I think, about $200 on it. It was an add-on. You needed the Genesis in order to play it, except for the Sega CDX, and I think, what's the other one called that came out? The JVC-XI. Those two were all built into one, but they were also very expensive, and most people never even heard of them. But with the Sega CD, you had to have a Sega Genesis. The Sega CD and the Genesis had both their own power sources, so you had those two brick AC adapters. You had to find outlets to plug them in, so that was a pain in the ass. And when it came down to the games, now I like the Sega CD a lot. I have a lot of pretty good games. There are a lot of other great games out there that I don't have that are very, very expensive that I'm probably never going to get. But the Sega CD does, it was famous for having a lot of games that had some pretty bad full motion videos. Back then, in those days of gaming, I think that the idea was full motion videos was going to be the future, and it really wasn't. That sort of phased out in the early life cycle of the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. But with the Sega CD, full motion videos were in, and that was the big thing, and they were just poor quality, very grainy, less gameplay. So a lot of those things, a lot of the things that I mentioned, in addition to other things, of course, internal issues with Sega, quality control, all that stuff, which led to the downfall of the Sega CD pretty quickly. And it's a shame, because it really did have a lot of great games. Some of the games like Lunar, like I showed you, were among them. Well, that's my Sega CD collection. Like I said, don't have too many of them. I hope you enjoyed it, and maybe you have some of these. But the Sega CD was a pretty good system in hindsight. And, all systems have bad games. Look at Nintendo. Nintendo had a lot of great games, right? But they also had a lot of crap, too. But there were other things with the Sega CD that led to its downfall when it comes to price and some internal issues. But, what can you do? Thank you all for watching.